The invitation was thick, creamy cardstock with a gold foil border and the kind of calligraphy that costs more per letter than my electric bill. It arrived in a flimsy standard envelope, postmarked 2 days ago. My mother had scribbled my address on the front, and in the corner a little note. Oops. Found this under a pile of mail. So sorry. My name is Gillian. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life I've been the family's dead branch, the one that doesn't bear fruit. I called my mother, Stacy, knowing exactly how the conversation would go. Oh, Gillian, honey, she said, her voice a strained melody of feigned concern. I am just mortified. It must have gotten stuck to a catalogue. You know how it is. I told Sadie, I know I mailed Gillian's, and she said she hadn't heard from you. Thank goodness she reminded me. Of course, my sister, Sadie, the benevolent family saviour. At 26, she was 5 years younger than me, but decades ahead in the only race that mattered to our parents, the one for the perfect life. She was pregnant, engaged to a perfectly nice man named Damien, and about to be crowned queen at her own baby shower. I work for an environmental non-profit, a career my father, Collins, once called a very expensive hobby. It's fine, Mom, I said, my voice flat. I got it. Wonderful! We're so excited to see you. It's going to be a beautiful day. Everyone will be there. Everyone was code for their entire social circle, a curated audience for the Ray family's ongoing performance. I should have said no. I should have thrown the invitation in the recycling bin, blocked their numbers, and spent the weekend hiking with my friend Shiloh. But I couldn't. Something had been coiling in my gut for months, a cold, heavy snake of suspicion. And I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that I had to be there. It started about 4 months ago. I'd stopped by my parents' house to pick up some old photo albums for a project. My father, who is 59 and runs his own successful consulting firm, wasn't home, but he'd told me to let myself in. The albums were in his office, and while I was looking for them, I needed a pen to label a box. I pulled open the top drawer of his desk. Beneath a mess of paper clips and stray business cards was a folded receipt from a high-end jewelry store downtown. I'm not a snooper by nature, but the name of the store caught my eye. It was wildly expensive, the kind of place you go for milestone anniversaries. Curiosity 1. I unfolded it. The purchase was for a custom-made tennis bracelet, gold with a single, small sapphire in the clasp. The price made my stomach clench. It was more than I made in 2 months. I assumed it was a surprise for my mother. Their anniversary was coming up. I folded it, put it back, and thought nothing more of it. Until 2 weeks later, at a family dinner, Sadie was glowing, her hand resting on her barely-there bump, and on her wrist was the bracelet, gold, delicate, with a tiny blue spark at the clasp. "Oh, Sadie, that's beautiful," my mother had gushed, reaching for her wrist. Sadie beamed. "Damien gave it to me. An early push present," he said. "Isn't he the sweetest?" I glanced at Damien. He looked pleased, but also a little confused, like a man accepting praise for a good deed he didn't quite remember doing. I looked at my father, who was watching Sadie with an intensity that felt wrong. It wasn't pride, it was something else, possessive, guarded. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second, and his smile tightened. I told myself I was crazy, that I was projecting my own resentments onto them. I was the cold one, the selfish one, the one who chose a child-free life and was therefore deemed unlovable after my last serious relationship with my ex, Thaddeus, ended. My family had made that clear. Maybe I was just looking for cracks in their perfect facade. But as I stood in my apartment, holding the ostentatious invitation, I remembered something else from that day in my father's office. After I'd found the receipt, I went to move his phone, which he'd left on the desk. The screen lit up with a notification for a new voicemail. My thumb brushed the play button by accident. It was only a few seconds of audio before I frantically shut it off, my heart pounding. It wasn't a clear message. It was just the sound of someone crying, a choked, desperate sob. Then a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "This is wrong." The baby shower was being held at a historic inn, the kind with manicured gardens and walls so thin you could hear a fork drop 3 rooms away. The event hall was a pastel nightmare of pink and white balloons, tissue paper flowers, and a banner that read, "A little princess is on her way," in shimmering gold script. The air smelled of sugar and lilies, a cloying combination that made my teeth ache. My mother greeted me at the door. She hugged me, a brittle, papery embrace that lasted exactly 3 seconds. "So glad you could make it," she whispered, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Try not to look so grim. It's a party." I gave her a tight smile of my own and walked into the lion's den. Sadie was holding court on a wicker throne, decorated with ribbons, a literal queen for the day. She was radiant, her hand permanently affixed to her stomach, accepting gifts and compliments with practiced grace. And on her wrist, catching the light from the chandeliers, was the gold and sapphire bracelet. "Jill, you came!" she called out, her voice sweet as honey. I moved toward her, navigating a sea of my mother's friends, all of whom gave me the same pitying look, the look reserved for the unmarried, childless, 31-year-old daughter. Damien stood beside her chair, looking like a handsome, nervous prop. He was a good guy, an architect who seemed genuinely in love with the version of Sadie she presented to the world. He gave me a relieved smile. "Hey, Jillian. Good to see you." "You too, Damien," I said. "Congratulations." "Isn't it all just perfect?" Sadie sighed, lifting her wrist. "And look what my sweet fiancé got me. He spoils me rotten." She leaned over and kissed Damien's cheek. I watched him. He smiled, but it was strained. "She deserves the best," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. I managed to pull him aside a few minutes later near the beverage table, under the pretense of asking about his latest project. "It's a beautiful bracelet, Damien," I said, keeping my voice casual. "You have great taste." He shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes as he poured a glass of lemonade. Thanks. I had help picking it out." He glanced over at Sadie, a flicker of something. Anxiety? Confusion in his eyes before it vanished. He was a terrible liar, but he was trying his best. Later, I found my mother fussing over the gift table, rearranging bows and cards so the most expensive brands were visible. This was my chance. "Mom," I started, my voice low. "Can I ask you something?" She didn't look up. "If it's about why your gift isn't front and center, it's because a registry item is always more practical than a donation to save the red-crested tree frog." I ignored the jab. "Do you remember what you said to me after Thaddeus and I broke up?" She finally stopped arranging ribbons and sighed, a long, put-upon sound. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Jillian, Don't bring up ancient history at your sister's party. This is a happy day. You told me that maybe if I were a little warmer, a little less focused on my career, I could have kept a man, I said, the words tasting like ash. You said no one wants a wife who's difficult. Stacy finally looked at me, her face a mask of polite indifference. You were emotional. We were all just trying to help you see things clearly. Honestly, the drama you create is exhausting. She patted my arm condescendingly. Now, go get some cake, and for God's sake, smile. She turned her back on me, dismissing my pain as easily as she'd dismiss a caterer. I stood there, frozen, the familiar cold seeping into my bones. It was always like this. My feelings were inconvenient truths in their perfectly constructed world. My gaze drifted across the room and landed on my father. He was standing behind Sadie's throne, one hand resting on her shoulder. As I watched, his hand slid down her arm, his fingers tracing the line of the bracelet before coming to rest on her hand. It was a gesture that lasted only a moment, but it was intimate. Too intimate. I remembered all the other times I'd seen things that felt slightly off. Him insisting on driving Sadie to her college tours alone. The late-night phone calls he'd take from her, whispering in his office. The way he looked at her, a mixture of pride and something else. Something I now recognized as ownership. Sadie must have felt my stare. Her head snapped up, and her eyes met mine across the room. My father's hand immediately retreated. For a second, her mask of serene joy slipped. I saw a flash of pure, cold panic in her eyes. She excused herself from her circle of admirers and walked directly toward me, her smile back in place, but her eyes hard as glass. She stopped in front of me, blocking my view of our father. "What are you looking at?" "Just taking it all in," I said evenly. "It's quite a production." Her smile didn't waver, but her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Not everything is your business, Jill." The look she gave me wasn't just a warning. It was almost afraid, almost knowing. And in that moment, I knew my suspicions weren't just in my head. They were real. Sadie's warning hung in the air between us, sharp and ugly. I gave her a non-committal nod and turned away, my stomach churning. I needed air. I needed a moment away from the suffocating sweetness of the room. I walked toward the back of the hall, past the kitchens, looking for an exit to the gardens. A door to a small side office was slightly ajar. As I passed, I heard voices from within, my father's low baritone and Sadie's, high and strained. I froze, pressing myself into the alcove of the hallway. "Can't handle this right now," Sadie was saying, her voice trembling. "She keeps looking at me. She knows something." "She knows nothing." My father's voice was a low growl, laced with the calm authority he used to close business deals and end family arguments. "She's bitter, that's all. She sees you happy, and she can't stand it." "It's not just that. She asked Damien about the bracelet." There was a heavy silence. I held my breath. "He didn't say anything, did he?" Collins asked, his voice dangerously soft. "No, but he's a terrible liar. You should have just let me tell him I bought it for myself." "Absolutely not," he snapped. "We agreed this would never interfere with the family. The story is the story. Damien gave it to you. End of discussion." "Then make sure she stays silent," Sadie pleaded, her voice cracking. "I can't do this if she's going to blow everything up. You have to handle her." I will handle her, he said, and the finality in his tone sent a chill down my spine. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found a side door and stumbled out into the pristine garden, gasping for the cool afternoon air. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I scrolled to Shiloh's name and hit call. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you survived the party of the century yet?" "Shiloh," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I was right. It's worse than I thought. "What happened? Are you okay?" Her playful tone vanished, replaced by sharp concern. I quickly recounted everything: the bracelet, Damien's nervousness, the conversation I'd just overheard. I left nothing out. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. "Get out of there, Jill," she said finally, her voice low and serious. "Right now. Get in your car and drive away. This is not your mess to clean up." "I can't," I said, leaning against the cold brick of the inn. "They're not going to get away with this." "Get away with what, exactly?" she pressed. "Jillian, listen to me. Your family is toxic. We've known this for years. But this is something else. This is dangerous. For your own sake, you need to walk away. Let them implode on their own." "He called me a dead branch, Shiloh," I said, the memory of a dozen similar comments surfacing. "He spent my entire life making me feel worthless because I didn't follow his plan for me. And all this time he's been... what? Grooming her?" The word felt disgusting in my mouth, but it was the only one that fit. The golden child wasn't just a metaphor, it was literal. "Then he's a monster," Shiloh said fiercely. "And you don't fight monsters, you run from them." "Please, Jill, just come home." I knew she was right. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to leave. But I thought of Sadie's panicked eyes, my father's possessive hand, my mother's willful ignorance. I thought of Damien, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. "I have to go," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'll call you later." I hung up before she could argue and walked back inside, my mind racing. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground was crumbling beneath me. I needed one more piece, something solid. My eyes scanned the room and landed on a large corkboard decorated with ribbons and baby blocks. It was a Wishes for Baby display. Tacked among the handwritten notes and sonogram pictures of Sadie and Damien as infants was a recent ultrasound photo of their daughter. I'd glanced at it when I first arrived, but now I walked straight toward it, my focus narrowing. It was a standard black and white image, but printed in the top corner was a string of text. Patient. Sadie Ray. Scan date 03/14, and below that, EDD 0820. Estimated due date August 20th. My blood ran cold. I did the math in my head, my thoughts sharp and clinical. A full-term pregnancy is 40 weeks. An August 20th due date meant conception happened around the middle of November. Sadie and Damien announced their engagement on Christmas Eve. I remembered it perfectly, because my mother had called me the next day to tell me how wonderful it was that at least one of her daughters was on the right track. They'd been dating for less than a year. The math was simple. And it was impossible. When this baby was conceived, Sadie and Damien hadn't even been engaged. In fact, they'd been going through a rough patch. Sadie had told me they almost broke up in October. The baby wasn't just a surprise. It was a lie. I left the baby shower without saying goodbye. I drove straight from the inn to my parents' house, my mind a cold, clear machine. They wouldn't be home for hours. The caterers were booked until 5, and my mother would never leave a party before her guests. I let myself in with the spare key I still had, the silence of the house a stark contrast to the noise in my head. The due date was the anchor. Now, I just needed to connect the dots. I started in my father's office, the same room where I'd found the receipt. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just confirmation. My hands were steady as I sifted through his desk calendar from last year, October and November. He'd meticulously logged every meeting, every lunch. And there it was, a weekend in mid-November blocked out in red ink. Sadie. College visits. I remembered that weekend. Sadie had supposedly been looking at graduate programs. My father had insisted on taking her, saying it was a good father-daughter bonding trip. My mother had stayed home, complaining of a migraine. At the time, it seemed plausible. Now, it felt sinister. I went upstairs to the guest room, the room Sadie still used when she stayed over. Her things were still here, tucked away in drawers and closets. It felt like a violation, but I was past caring about privacy. I was searching for the truth. In the back of a dresser drawer, under a pile of old college sweatshirts, I found it. A small, leather-bound journal. My heart pounded as I opened it. Her handwriting was a loopy, girlish script, a stark contrast to the words on the page. Most of the entries were mundane, complaints about classes, drama with friends. But then, I found the entries from last fall. October 28th. Damien and I had a huge fight. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get me. I feel so alone. November 12th. Dad took me to look at schools this weekend. It was nice to get away. He's the only one who really understands. He said I'm special, not like everyone else. November 15th. I don't know what to do. I'm so confused. He said it didn't count. He said it was our secret, something just for us. He said I was special. The words blurred. I slammed the journal shut, a wave of nausea washing over me. The vague whispered voicemail I'd heard on his phone. This is wrong. It was her. It had to be. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the journal heavy in my lap. This was it. This was the proof, the timeline, the bracelet, the hushed conversation, the journal. It all pointed to the same monstrous conclusion. My leg began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The weight of it all was crushing me, the horror of it. The sheer, calculated evil of my own father, and the terrified complicity of my sister. For a moment, I wanted to follow Shiloh's advice. I wanted to run, to burn the journal, to pretend I never found it, to disappear from this family and never look back. But then I thought of my father's face, smiling benevolently at the baby shower. I thought of my mother, polishing the family image while the foundation rotted away. I thought of Sadie, a victim trapped in her own gilded cage, yet still pointing a finger at me. And I thought of myself, the designated scapegoat, the dead branch they were so eager to prune. The trembling in my leg stopped. A strange calm settled over me, cold and hard as steel. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It wasn't about anger or sadness. It was about dismantling a lie, piece by piece, in the most public way possible. Revenge was no longer a messy, emotional impulse. It was a surgical procedure, and I was the surgeon. I took a photo of the relevant journal pages with my phone. Then I slipped the journal back into the drawer, exactly where I'd found it. I walked through the house, my mind cataloguing every detail, every photograph on the wall. There was one from that college visit weekend. My father and Sadie, standing in front of some generic university sign. He had his arm around her, a proud father. But her smile was a grimace. She looked terrified. I went back to the party. I slipped in unnoticed and took my seat at a table in the back. No one had even realized I was gone. The main course was being served, and the room was filled with cheerful chatter. I ate my chicken, my movements precise and deliberate. I was no longer a guest. I was a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. After the plates were cleared and the 3-tiered cake was rolled out, my father stood up, tapping his champagne flute with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. He beamed, a charismatic patriarch in his element, holding the attention of everyone present. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Stacy and I are just overjoyed to be celebrating this beautiful new chapter for our family, to see our little girl, Sadie, so happy and ready to become a mother. It's every parent's dream." He looked at Sadie, who preened under his gaze, her hand on her belly. He then looked at Damien, giving him a magnanimous nod. "And Damien, son, we couldn't have handpicked a better man for our daughter. We're thrilled to welcome you officially into the family." Damien smiled, looking genuinely touched. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin, a perfect portrait of maternal pride. The performance was flawless. "Family," my father continued, his voice taking on a more serious, philosophical tone, "is about legacy. It's about carrying the torch, passing on our values, and ensuring the future. It's about life, growth, and abundance." His eyes, cold and blue, found mine across the room. The genial mask dropped for a fraction of a second, and I saw the man from the side office, the one who had promised to handle me. "Of course, not every branch on the family tree is destined to bear fruit," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. The entire table of my mother's friends turned to look at me. My face burned with humiliation, but I held his gaze, my expression a perfect blank. And while that can be a source of sadness, we can't waste our energy on selfishness and barrenness. The word hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Barrenness. He had reduced my entire life, my career, my choices, my very being, to a single, cruel word. Today, he raised his glass higher, his smile returning full force. We are celebrating life, not stagnation. We are celebrating the future of the Ray family, to Sadie and Damien, and to our new granddaughter. A chorus of, "To Sadie and Damien," echoed through the room, followed by enthusiastic applause. People were smiling, nodding in agreement. They saw a proud father, a loving family. They didn't see the rot beneath the floorboards. I sat perfectly still while they drank their champagne. I felt nothing. The rage, the hurt, the years of feeling small and inadequate, it had all burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. He had just handed me the stage. He thought he was delivering the final, public blow, cementing my status as the family failure. He had no idea he was giving me my opening. I waited for the applause to die down. I waited for the servers to begin cutting the cake. Then I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping lightly against the polished floor. I stood up. My mother shot me a look of pure venom, a silent command to sit down and stop making a scene. Sadie's smile faltered. My father's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. I walked calmly toward the small podium where he had just been standing. I moved with a purpose that made people stop their conversations and watch. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, but the only ones that mattered were the 4 at the head table. I reached the microphone. I adjusted it slightly, the small movement amplified in the suddenly quiet room. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Then I looked at my family. My mother's smile was a thin, terrified line. Damien looked confused. Sadie was pale. My father's expression was frozen, a mask of cordiality stretched tight over a core of pure fury. He knew what I was about to do. He had dared me to. I leaned into the microphone, my voice clear and steady, without a trace of the tremor I felt deep inside. "May I say a few words?" I asked. My mother's thin smile was the only permission I needed. I took a breath and smiled warmly at the crowd, a perfect imitation of the Ray family charm. "Thank you all so much for being here to celebrate my sister," I began, my voice even and pleasant. "Sadie has always been the golden child of our family, and she deserves all the happiness in the world. I am so thrilled that she's found such a very special man to build her life with." I paused, letting my eyes drift over to the head table. Damien looked slightly less confused, mollified by the compliment. Sadie, however, was rigid in her wicker throne. "A man so generous," I continued, my voice taking on a storyteller's cadence, "that he would gift her a custom gold and sapphire bracelet as an early push present. A man so devoted that he would take her on a special trip last November, just the 2 of them, to create a cherished memory before their lives got busy with a new baby." Whispers started to ripple through the room. I saw Damien's brow furrow in confusion. He glanced at Sadie, then at the bracelet on her wrist. He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. "It's a beautiful story," I said, my smile unwavering. "The only strange part is the timing. You see, the baby's due date is August 20th. For those of you who aren't obstetricians, that means conception happened around mid-November. But Sadie and Damien didn't get engaged until Christmas Eve. In fact, I seem to remember they were having some trouble last fall." The whispers grew louder. People were turning to look at each other, their polite party faces morphing into expressions of shock and morbid curiosity. My mother's face was ashen. "But love is complicated, isn't it?" I went on, my tone becoming more intimate, as if sharing a secret. "Sometimes, when you feel lost and alone, you turn to the person you trust the most, the person who has always told you how special you are." I pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I brought up the photo of the journal page and held it up, though I knew no one could read it from a distance. The gesture was all that mattered. "Sadie keeps a journal," I announced to the silent room. "And in it, she wrote about that weekend. She wrote about feeling confused. She wrote about a secret. She wrote, and I quote, 'He said it didn't count. He said I was special.'" Sadie made a small, strangled noise. Damien stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He looked from her to my father, then back again, the pieces clicking into place in his mind with sickening speed. I lowered the phone and looked directly at my father. His face was white, his charismatic facade completely gone, replaced by a look of pure, cornered rage. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the denial, the explosion, the explanation. "Isn't that right, Dad?" I asked. my voice quiet but carrying through the microphone to every corner of the hall. Isn't that the legacy you were talking about? The one you're so proud to pass on? Silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed down on all of us. Every eye in the room was on Collins Ray, waiting. He stood slowly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My mother was glaring at him, her expression a mixture of terror and fury. She wasn't horrified by what he'd done. She was horrified that he'd been caught. "This is absurd," he finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse rasp. Gillian has always been a vindictive, troubled girl. She's making this up to ruin her sister's special day. He tried to project authority, to regain control of the narrative, but it was too late. The lie was too big, and the evidence was too damning. He looked at Sadie, a silent, desperate command in his eyes for her to back him up, to play her part one last time. But Sadie just stared at him, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling. The pressure, the secrets, the years of manipulation, it all shattered in that one awful moment. A broken sob tore from her throat, a raw, animal sound of pain that silenced any remaining doubt in the room. "He said it was love," she choked out, looking at no one and everyone. He said it was our love." Sadie's confession shattered the last remnants of civility. The room erupted. A woman shrieked. Someone else gasped. "Oh my God!" Damien shoved his chair back so violently it crashed to the floor. He stared at Sadie, then at my father, his face a canvas of pure revulsion. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the room, his back ramrod straight. That was the signal. The dam broke. Guests scrambled for the exits, a frantic exodus of people desperate to escape the blast radius. Some, however, stayed, their phones held up, shamelessly filming the implosion of the perfect Ray family. My mother's friends were yelling, some at my father, some at me. In the center of the chaos, Stacy, my mother, let out a soft, theatrical moan and slumped sideways in her chair in a dead faint. I didn't stay to watch the rest. My part was done. I walked off the small stage, my steps feeling strangely light. I navigated through the panicked crowd, my face a neutral mask. I could feel their stares, hear their whispers. "Did you hear what she said?" Her own father. That poor girl. But it all felt distant, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. Shiloh was waiting for me by the main entrance, her car already pulled up to the curb. She must have been parked nearby, waiting for my signal. She opened the passenger door, her face grim. "Get in," she said, her voice tight. I slid into the seat, and she pulled away from the curb, just as the first ambulance sirens began to wail in the distance, likely called for my mother. As we drove, the adrenaline that had been fueling me for the past few hours began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its place. My hands, which had been so steady at the microphone, began to shake uncontrollably. I gripped them together in my lap, staring out the window at the blur of passing trees. "You did it," Shiloh said quietly, her eyes on the road. "You actually did it." I just nodded, unable to speak. The satisfaction I had expected to feel, the triumphant release, wasn't there. In its place was just a vast, hollow emptiness. We were almost back to my apartment when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Please, I need to talk to you. I'm at your building." It was Sadie. "She's at my place," I told Shiloh, my voice raspy. Shiloh swore under her breath. "Do you want me to come up with you?" "No," I said. "I need to do this alone." She was waiting on the steps of my apartment building, a pathetic figure huddled in her pastel maternity dress. Her face was swollen and blotchy from crying, her perfect hair a mess. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide with a familiar, childlike fear. She wasn't here to fight. She wasn't here to scream at me for ruining her life. "Don't tell the police," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Jill." "You can't." I stared at her, the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. After everything, after the public humiliation and the destruction of her engagement, her first instinct was still to protect him. Or, more accurately, to protect herself from him. "Why, Sadie?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Why would you protect him?" "You don't understand," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "He'll ruin me. He'll tell everyone it was my fault, that I wanted it. He'll say I'm crazy. People believe him. They always believe him. He'll take the baby. He said he would." And I finally understood the full, terrifying depth of his control. He hadn't just abused her, he had systematically dismantled her, convincing her that she was a willing participant in her own destruction, trapping her with threats and twisted declarations of love. My revenge had been satisfying, but it had only broken the cage. It hadn't freed the prisoner. For the first time, I looked at my sister not as a rival or a co-conspirator, but as what she was, a victim. It didn't absolve her of her choices, the lies, the cruelty, the way she'd helped them push me out, but it made them horribly, tragically human. I didn't promise her anything. I just looked at her, the golden child, stripped of all her shine, and walked past her into my building. Months passed. The world turned, even as mine had stopped. The story became a local scandal, whispered about in grocery stores and hair salons. I heard snippets through the grapevine. Damien had left town. My father was under investigation, though charges were slow to materialize. My mother was in seclusion. One afternoon, a single plain white envelope arrived in my mail. No return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It was a photocopy of an old ultrasound, the image grainy and dated. In the top corner was the patient name, Stacy Ray. And next to it, scrawled in my mother's handwriting, was a date from 32 years ago. Taped to the bottom of the page was a small, typed note. It read, "You were never supposed to know." I stared at it, my blood running cold. I looked closer at the patient name on the ultrasound. My mother had taken a black marker and drawn a thick, angry line through something right next to her name. But it wasn't perfect. I could just make out the faint shape of the letters underneath. It was my name. Jillian. The ultrasound copy felt like a ghost in my hand. "You were never supposed to know." It wasn't a confession. It was a final, bitter accusation. My very existence was a secret she had been forced to keep. The blacked-out name next to hers wasn't a mistake. It was a redaction. I wasn't Stacy Ray's daughter. I was just hers. The first secret in a family built on them. It explained everything. The distance, the resentment, the constant subtle reinforcement that I didn't quite belong. Sadie was their real daughter, their chance to get it right. I was the prologue they were forced to include in the book. The legal fallout was messy and unsatisfying. Collins hired the best lawyers money could buy. They painted Sadie as a troubled, manipulative young woman, and him as a doting father whose affection had been twisted by a vindictive, jealous older daughter. Me. But the journal, combined with Sadie's eventual, reluctant testimony to a therapist who was a mandated reporter, was enough. He wasn't charged with a crime. The statutes and circumstances were too murky. But the investigation and the ensuing civil suit from Damien's family financially ruined him. His reputation was obliterated. He was a pariah. Stacy retreated into a fortress of denial, refusing to cooperate with anyone. She was never charged with anything, but in the court of public opinion, her silence was an admission of guilt. She sold the house and moved to another state, disappearing from the world that had once been her stage. Sadie entered intensive therapy. I heard she gave the baby up for adoption, a quiet, closed process that gave the child a chance at a life untouched by the Ray family poison. She never contacted me again, and I never reached out. Our shared trauma was not a bridge. It was a chasm. With the foundation of my life revealed to be nothing but sand, I found myself strangely unburdened. The weight of trying to earn their love, of fighting for a place at a table I was never truly welcome at, was gone. I was free. Not in a triumphant, joyful way, but in a quiet, stark way. Like a prisoner walking out of a cell into a world that is suddenly too bright and too quiet. A few weeks after receiving the ultrasound, I got a job offer. The head of a major environmental foundation I'd long admired had heard about my work and wanted me to lead a new conservation project. The catch? It was in Oregon, on the other side of the country. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. Shiloh helped me pack. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There was nothing left to say. She just taped up boxes and made sure I ate, her steady presence a silent anchor in the storm. "You're really doing it," she said, as we loaded the last box into my car. "There's nothing left for me here," I said. It was the simple truth. She pulled me into a fierce hug. "Call me when you get there, and don't you dare become a stranger." "Never," I promised. Before I left town for good, there was one last thing I had to do. I drove to my childhood home. A for sale sign was already staked in the manicured lawn. The house was empty, professionally cleaned and staged for prospective buyers. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. It was just a building now, a collection of walls and windows stripped of all meaning. I stood in my old bedroom, looking out the window at the sprawling oak tree in the backyard. For years, my father had called it the family tree. He'd point to the thick, sturdy trunk as himself, the main branches as my mother and their perfect daughter, Sadie. And then there was my branch, the one that grew a little crooked, a little too far from the sun. They called me barren, but it turns out I was the only one who could birth the truth.